Hello, all my JavaScript friends. This is TheVirtuoid, aka Mike Smith, and this is our RPG role-playing game. This video is going to talk about databases. In our introductory video, I mentioned that I thought it'd be fun to create our own database system instead of using things like SqlLite or MySQL or MongoDB. And I'll tell you right now, you are certainly welcome if you are going to be using this code to be able to use SqlLite, MongoDB, MySQL, or anything like that. I just thought it'd be fun to have our own little database system. It should be really cool. Okay, before we do it, let's take a look at Basic Fantasy. And then again, basicfantasy.org is the place where you can pick up the manual that we're showing right here. The people who created all this have graciously allowed me to be able to use this code or this page here, this manual here, as the basis for all my code. So be sure you go out and visit basicfantasy.org and take a look at all the wonderful stuff that they have. But here's the thing that we want to be able to do here. Notice here we got character abilities, we have ability store and bonus penalties. That's not that big a deal here, but if we take a look at the different races here, we have all of our different races that they have listed here: the halflings, the humans, the elves, and the dwarfs. Here we have an entire database or entire structures, all the different character classes: the cleric, the fighter, the magic user, the thief. The thief even has a huge ton of abilities based upon, the different things that they may be able to do. And we also are into equipment, prices, weights, all the different weapons, the different damage you can do, missile weapon ranges, short, medium, long, armor and shield, beast of burdens, and so on and so forth. We eventually have spells. See what a spell here. Yeah, we eventually have spells, for magic users. We have spells for clerics. We have monsters, things like that. It's really, really wonderful. Here's the bat, giant bat, and everything. So we have all this data that's available. In fact, the vast majority of this manual is data. How can we represent that data as efficiently as possible without having to use SQL, MySQL, or anything like that? Well, it's very simple. And I basically built index files. And this, I'm going back to the way I used to do things a long time ago. And I thought, okay, how did we do it back then? Okay, we used linked list. Well, no, linked list was not a good idea. It too much had to deal with there, especially since we're going to have multiple indexes. Well, the better way of doing it is to basically say this particular record is at this particular section of the file. This other record is at this section of the file, and we just go with it from there. So let's take a look now at how we have done that in the database section. All right, so let's take a look at, first of all, abilities. Now here's all. Let me just see if we can get all that on there. There we go. So here's the abilities. What I first did is I went through and said, okay, let's create JSON files of all the different data that we're going to need. And in this case, this happens to be the abilities section. And these are abilities of different types, strengths, abbreviations, and descriptions. This is basically the different things that we're going to be able to have within the game. And so if we want to add different abilities, in this case, a luck, for example, or anything like that, or endurance was another one, we could just add it to this particular JSON list. And so all I've done here is that for each one of these, I have given myself all these different JSON files. Here happens to be all of the armor JSON files. Here's all of our different attributes that we have here. And this basically is attributes of, for instance, levels, experience, armor class, hit points, dragon breath, spells, things like that. All of our character classes. And what's interesting about this character class, it's very huge, is because not only, for instance, for cleric here, not only have that, we have different restrictions. So we had to figure out how to do restrictions for it. We have all the different level data. That would be, level 1, for example, is the experience points of 0, how many hit points you get, how many spells you get based upon the different levels of spells, and so on and so forth. So you have that for the cleric. You have information here for the fighter and his level data, the magic user, their level data, all their spell data, and the thief stuff. And the thief stuff is huge because not only do we have all of its different restrictions, all of its different level data, but we also have other abilities based upon whether they can do open locks, remove traps, pickpockets, move silently, climb walls, all that kind of fun stuff. So all this gets incorporated within the character class JSON. So also we have things like the equipment. Here's all the different equipment that you have. Here's all the different races and their restrictions. Here's all the different weapons that you can have in the system. So basically, this is a one-to-one correspondence. Let's go back to the screen over here. This is a one-to-one correspondence with all this different data that you see here. Like here's the equipment, and let's bring up the equipment on this side. All this equipment that you see on the screen here is exactly the same of all the equipment that you see here. So basically a one-to-one correspondence. And so that now gives me the ability to be able to take any table on this system here and convert it over to a JSON file. And so once we've done that, everything is okay. Well, what about the monsters? Yeah. Well, the monsters are huge. This is the markdown file. I basically took the PDF that they had there. And in fact, actually, they had an open document file for this. And thank y'all, basicfantasy.org people, for having that open document file. So I was able to get it to go to an MD file. And then once we got it to the MD file, I was able to then take it, okay, I've now got to convert it to where it's a normal format. And this is basically a normal format where you have all this different data for each of the individual monsters, all the description, all that. And in some of them where there were multiple ones on one page, like ant giant, ant huge, and ant large, I actually had to go through and split those three. But we still got a lot to go through here. I haven't finished this whole thing here yet, because if we now go through the monsters here, here's our monsters. Here's all of the different monsters. I split them all up in individual MD files. And I got to go through each and every single one of them to make sure that they, like for instance, here's one that has two of them on there. I want to split this one up into two different ones. So once I have all of this, I'm going to have a JSON file for all the different monsters. And once I have the JSON file there, then what I do is, let me close off all these tabs here. We run a program called what I call build index. Now, right now, here's all the different files, the JSON files that I have. And what this build index does is it just goes through very, very easily. It just goes through the whole system here and builds an index file and reformats all the JSON files into what we call JSON-L. So for instance, let's what we'll do is let's close out this monster one so I can see where the heck I am. So let's go to abilities. The abilities is a good one here. So here's our different abilities, our original JSON file. What the build index does is now it will go through and create a JSON-L file. And the JSON-L file is a JSON file, but its delimiter is a line feed at the very end. So at the end of each one of these, I have a line feed. So you don't see the normal, let me go back over here. You'll see the, hey, this is an array symbol here. You don't, and commas at the very end to make it valid JSON. You don't see that here. The JSON-L basically says I'm using character return line feeds to be able to say hey, I'm at the very end. But the most important thing here is that what it's also done is it has given it a UUID, which if you're not familiar with UUID is universal unique identification. I think that's what officially is called. I'll have to look it up when I edit the video, but doesn't matter. But the idea here is that each one has its own separate ID. And these IDs, I think somebody calculated one time, is that if you had a couple of hundred computers doing calculating IDs, like 1,000 per second or something like that, it would take them tens of millions of years to come up with a duplicate. So that's how easy, that basically you're pretty much, they're not guaranteed, obviously, but pretty much you're guaranteed that, you're not guaranteed, but you're pretty much, can be confident that each one of these are unique. And the reason for that is it's extraordinarily important. Because what we also do is that when we build all these JSON-L files, I also build what we call an index file. Let's take a look at that index file. And it's going to be kind of hard to see here, but this index file has, this is just a regular JSON file. And as you can see here, it's an array type file. But the idea here is I have a key of an ID here. So what I've done here is that each one of these, let's back that up here. Each one of these records basically says, I have an ID here. This is my ID. This is the start position within the file abilities, and this is the length of that name. So the ID of 1D39D inside the abilities file which happens to be strength here, says that at position 0 is the start of the record and the end of the record is position 147. So all I have to do is pull up this ID right here. If I want to search for an ID for anything within the entire system, this ID basically says that, oh, this is inside the equipment database. It is starting at byte position 4361 and length of 91. So if we were to go to the equipment, and we'll search for 75CO. So if we go to the equipment one, 75CO, 75CO. I had to pick the very last one. It happens to be the winter blanket. And so the winter blanket will be pulled up if I do it by ID. Well, now how do you know what's the ID and what's not the, how do you know the ID all the time? Well, sometimes you don't. So I also created a name index, which does the exact same thing. So for instance, this name index here parses it by the name. Each one of these different JSON-L files will have a name associated with it, and this name will allow us to be able to now index it not only by its ID but by its name itself. So I wanted the strength one, for example. If I wanted to pull one on the middle here, if I wanted padlock with 2 keys, I could look for padlock with 2 keys, and this will give me all the information for padlock with 2 keys. Go to the very end here. Here's the weapon maul, where it starts, where its length is, and where the weapon is. So once we get the monsters in here, of course, these 2 files are going to be much larger. But the idea here is that once we do the database, which we will get to in another video, which is actually now. So the idea here now is once we get into the database class, the database class will then load in the indexes and be able to very quickly through a map search for both the IDs and the names and give us as instantaneous data as possible. So let's take a look. Let's clear off this tab here, and let's take a look at the database class itself. So that's within the database section. And it's going to be very, very easy. Is that basically I had to give it a new path. Now the database is a singleton instance, which means once the instance is created, it's going to use the same instance over and over again. There's no need to have 100 different instances to access the same database. One instance is fine. So it's going to be a singleton instance. It's going to make sure that it needs to find at least 2 files. It's going to need to find a .json-L files and the index files. So right now it's looked up by name, ID, and name, but it could be any type of thing. We can change that if we wish to. Methods are going to be extremely simple. Get, we'll be able to get by the key and by the value. I can either look for a key by ID or a key by name, or if we add more keys up here, we can look for those other keys. Get all, however, goes through the database name itself, and so I can then go through and say, okay, I want to get all ability. Oops, that's the JSON file. If I want to get all abilities, it will give me every one of the abilities that you see here indexed by ID automatically. So that's all there really is to that. How does that work? No, it's very simple. First of all, here is our singleton instance. If you want to know a little bit more about singleton instance, actually I have a Patreon video on that one. It will cost money, but I do have a Patreon video on that one. But you can also ask me. I'll tell you, or look it up. Doesn't really matter. So the idea here is that we, once we read the file and we do a processing file, we process all the files there. We get the database handles. We set up the instance so that the instance is done as a singleton all the time. I do synchronous reading all the time here. Technically, in reality, if you really want this thing robust, you should be doing asynchronous reading. I'm doing synchronous just for sake of ease right now. That's pretty much all there really is to it. Get is very, very simple. First of all, remember we're passing key and value. I want to make sure I have that key in the index. And right now it's just supporting ID and name. As you can tell, let's go through here. You can see here ID and name are the only 2 indexes that we support. I got to have a value in there. Then I just basically do a get. That's it. I don't do any other get. So the idea here is that once I get that index value, I grab the data from the index value and I do an open and read, which we'll get to in just a second, to be able to open up the file that's already there and read it. Get all does the exact same thing. I do an open and read basically once I get the database name. I do make sure that the databases are included. If you do say the database name, which because all you'd pass is this database name, I do make sure that it is included, and if it's not, I throw an error. Otherwise, I do the open and read. And the open and read is extraordinarily easy. I just open it. I get the file handle. I allocate the buffer, I read it, and then I'd return it as a string. And that's it. There's really nothing a whole lot to it. But the key here is this part right here, this read sync. I'm taking the start and the length values that you can see inside of the indexes here. Let's just do this one right here. Yeah, here you go. You can see the start and the length values within the index. I take that and I do a resync, which gives that to me, and I do the string, and that's it. And this whole section down here is just to process the files itself, about the ADX files and the JSON-L files. But that's basically all there is to it. And all I have to do here is just I parse it out to make sure I get the JSON parse, and I send it back as a JSON file. That's it. There's nothing else to the database. This is an extraordinarily simple database. It's not going to scale very well if you're going to have millions upon millions of records. It's not going to, at that point, you really do want to use SqlLite or MongoDB or something like that, because this is just a very simple database. I only did it because I just wanted to see if I could do it. And yeah, we could do it. And I can tell you right now, it works like a champ. Let's go to the ability here. For instance, on the abilities here, I used to have, if you've been following along on the video, I talked about we had a bunch of different static values for the abilities. That kind of limited me and put the database within the abilities class. Now the database is inside of a JSON inside the database. And this allows me to be able to now read the database information from the database file. And that makes my ability to add different attributes, or different abilities in this case, just as simple as going down here and changing this JSON file. It makes my code a lot easier than it was before. And so all of them have this. Now the abilities have this, the armor has this, the attributes, and if you're following along, all the different characters, all the different systems have this. But that's really all there is to the database system. Again, it's a very simple database. It's not meant to be scaled very highly. So if you take it for what it is. It works great. We know we can do it. We've now learned how to do databases. But again, seriously, if you want to scale this up, use something else. But thanks again for watching, and we will see y'all later. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to this channel to view more videos. Click on the like button on this video and visit us at TheVirtuoid.com. Also, support us on Patreon, where you can get access to member-only videos. Links are down below. Again, thank you very much for watching, and keep on coding.